The Grand Vizier of Oz by Cedri. Chapter 9. Graduation. Year 21. Summer. Elphie! The green girl jumped, dropping a book as she leapt clear off the bed. Glinda? Glinda, what is it? Are you all right? Elphie, I can't choose, wailed the voice from the bathroom. The blue one is brighter and fancier, but it's 2 shades darker than my eyes, and the white one is just too pale. Wait. Groaning, Elphaba slumped forward and banged her head against the wall. Hair hissed out through her gritted teeth. Of course it's pale, she growled. White is always pale. But so is my graduation hood, replied Glinda, flying out of the bathroom and completely oblivious to her friend's irritation. She reached out to grab her plain black robe from where it lay with Elphaba's over a chair and held it up against her body. With her free hand, she tossed the broad white sash over her shoulders to roughly where it would be hanging the next day. See? She said, holding the lacy white dress next to it. This would make everything either black or white, and I'm so pale that I'll look all washed out. Your hair is yellow, replied Elphaba, dropping back down to her bed. Stop worrying, you look good in everything. Tossing aside the garments with more drama than was strictly necessary, Glinda scowled. You're not helping, Elphie. Why don't you take a break and decide what you're going to do with my hair then? Her friend suggested dryly, picking up the book. I know you've bought me another green dress. I saw it hanging in your wardrobe. Indeed, a corner of the telltale garment bag from Glinda's favorite tailor was peeking out from between her most fluffy dresses. The blonde girl narrowed her eyes. You peeked? I didn't have to. You always buy me dark green outfits. You're really taking this image thing too far. Appeased, but hardly satisfied, Glinda plopped down on her own bed and began rummaging through half-packed jewelry boxes. At least you've come to your senses about letting me dress you. It's hard to say no when you literally burned the rest of my wardrobe, Elphaba replied with a completely straight face, pretending to read as she continued the banter. Glinda chuckled. I am sorry, I was aiming for the candlesticks. It's not my fault all your hideous frocks are, were so flammable. Anyway, I was thinking gold flowers. Sorry? For your hair, Elphie. For tomorrow. I have fake flowers in here somewhere, and I'm sure they were dark gold, too, so they'd match your hood scarf thingy very well. She waved a hand absently towards Elphaba's unworn robes and the hood that was indeed both white and gold, representing a double major in sorcery and history, respectively. I'm not so sure about flowers, Glinda. I'm not a flowery sort of person. I don't even like them. Glinda slowly raised her head, arched one eyebrow, and pointed to the small vase sitting on their desk, which held 5 bright red poppies. Elphaba blushed. That's different. They were a gift. It'd be rude to throw them away. Elphie, he's your boyfriend. Has been for months now. You're allowed to like it when he brings you flowers. Muttering something about how last week wasn't even a special occasion, though it was, being the day they'd all received their final results confirming that they could graduate, and besides, he'd brought some for Glinda too. Elphaba surrendered and buried her face in her book, still blushing. Glinda took the chance to very casually pull out a stack of new makeup compacts and secretly compare her friend's purple cheeks to the different shades of powder. It had been a few months since Elphaba had formally agreed to accept Oscar's offer, and there had been next to no fuss about it. He'd kept his word, done everything she'd demanded, and quite a bit more, and as he predicted, there was still an awfully long way to go. Fiero's languid teaching and their own extra classes in political science had given both girls a very basic grasp of their oncoming jobs and enough self-confidence to try, and Elphaba was more or less satisfied with the moral integrity of the government she was about to become part of. On the other hand, she just wasn't comfortable with the title of Grand Vizier. Knowing that they would be living in the Emerald City in just a few weeks, after a little time spent at home with their families, unsettled her, and she skirted the details as best as possible. Glinda, on the other hand, had no problem with the as-yet quiet fame that came from being one of the great Oz's apprentices, and gleefully looked forward to more. With that in mind, she simply refused to let either of them go out there tomorrow looking anything less than their best. Discarding 3 shades of purple and keeping 2, she began to check the silvers. For a while, comfortable silence reigned in room 22. The clock ticked faintly as afternoon sunlight began creeping across the floor. Once finished with her powder checking, mainly because she thought Elfie might be getting suspicious, Glinda returned to sorting out their jewelry and packing her belongings in the trunks that her family's servants were ready to take home. Her parents had arrived at Shiz several days earlier, and after spending almost every waking moment with their precious little girl, had gone into town together to look around, hoping, Glinda knew, to run into somebody important. Said person would, without doubt, be treated to many proud stories about how their daughter had an apprenticeship with the Wizard of Oz and was a personal friend, too. If it weren't so flattering, and if she hadn't been doing it herself, Glinda might have been embarrassed. At about 2:30, when Glinda was once again in front of the mirror, a tapping sound started to echo quietly, but persistently, through the room. It was a moment before either Elphaba, who was reading, or Glinda, absorbed in decision-making, noticed. Tap! 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 Chistery! Glinda looked up. Hovering outside the window was her favorite of the winged monkeys, wearing a brand-new white coat, courtesy of his tailor brother, Tripthy. He waved and grinned as the girls finally noticed, and Elphaba, almost tripping over herself, hurried to let him in. The little chip landed neatly on the floor, agile as always, and straightened up with a smile. "Good day," he chirped. "Hello, Chistery," Glinda said quickly, taking his hand and tugging him to the mirror. "Will you do me a favor, please?" Elphaba sighed as Chistery nodded. "Happy to." Glinda lifted the fabric again and asked, "Blue or white?" His face slid into a frown of confusion. After a moment, he pointed at each and said, "Blue, white, black," with perfect accuracy. "Oh, sorry, that's not what I meant. Do you think this would look better if I wear blue?" she demonstrating, holding the dress and robes together. "Or the white?" Chistery's face cleared as he understood, and he tilted his head in a very monkeyish fashion, considering. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to," promised Elphaba, but Chistery shook his head. "Happy to, Miss Elba," he replied, grinning as he deliberately used her old nickname, probably hoping it would make her smile. It did, and after a long moment, Chistery looked up and said, "Blue is nice, Miss Glinda." She smiled. "Then I'll wear that one. Thank you." "You are welcome." Elphaba just shook her head, amused. "So how are you, Chistery?" she asked. "Have you and your family made a decision yet?" "Not all my family have decided yet," he replied, his shaky grammar still apparent. "I and Selkie and Vibra and Rishti all want to go with you. Tripthy and Shelba not. They like Dr. Diddlemond better." He said this with a weak sort of scowl. Smiling fondly, Elphaba nodded, unconcerned by the lack of finality from the monkey clan. It wouldn't be hard to escort them to or from Shiz if anyone changed their mind. Before she could ask more questions, though, Chistery straightened up in a manner that looked vaguely familiar. Like, she later realized, the self-imported stance of the official messengers who came those few times that Diggs sent something special to Elphaba, something that couldn't go through normal mail. Like monkeys. "Miss Rose has a message for Miss Elba," he said proudly. Elphaba fought to keep her features calm and pleasant. "Nessa shouldn't be sending you around like a servant, Chistery. It's wrong." "Happy to, Miss Elba," the monkey said cheerfully, one wingtip hitting a small stack of papers, which he then hurried to pick up, still chattering. "Miss Rose was sent at the stairs and said it important to tell you to come down to meet train soon." Elphaba jerked upright. "What time is it?" she demanded, looking at the clock. Hissing and muttering fiercely under her breath, she darted across the room and scrambled to put on some shoes. "I'm sorry, I've got to go. Our father's train gets here at 3 and we're supposed to meet him. Damn!" She threw a second left boot against the wall, scowling as she dug through the jumbled pile of footwear. Glinda deftly pulled out the right one. "Here," she said. "Don't worry, Elfie, you'll make it. Those trains are always late anyway. Just remember, I won't be here when you get back. Shen and I are going shopping." For the last time, she added, looking both surprised and a little sad. I'll see you later, then, said Elphaba, pulling the door open. Thanks, Chistery, she called, and was gone before her friend had even drawn breath to respond. Welcome, Miss Elba. Waiting below at the base of the stairs, Nessa Rose-Thrap was not happy. Admittedly, this wasn't a rare occurrence anymore, but today, with the stress of graduation and the unsettling realization that this was it, that suddenly her easy, class-oriented life at Shiz was over, Nessa's nerves and constantly simmering resentment had boiled over into full-on outrage. How dare Elphaba be late for their father's arrival? Had she no respect at all, no decency? Or was she starting to think she was better than everyone else, what with her special apprenticeship and invitation to live in the Emerald City? Of course, this wasn't true. And intellectually, Nessa knew better, but she was in no mood to be reasonable. She was doing the right thing as best she could in this hideous chair, but she couldn't wheel herself all the way to the station in time. She would work up an awful sweat, spoiling all the time and effort she'd put into her hair and clothes, and father would frown. Worse, what if Bach saw her? She'd been so careful this past year to make sure he only ever saw her at her best, her happiest, most beautiful, most generous, that she couldn't stand it if things fell apart now. She was desperately hoping that the nostalgia everyone seemed to be having over graduation was going to work in her favor. Surely Bach would find himself remembering the good times they'd had together, dancing at the Ozdust, writing essays, comparing class notes. Well, that was about it, really, but they'd had fun, right? He'd said so every time they said goodbye. It's been fun, Nessa. True, he hadn't always been enthusiastic, but he couldn't have actually lied, could he? Could he? Nessa closed her eyes, forgetting Elphaba's lateness for a moment as she felt herself sink back into the misery that seemed to be constantly haunting her life. What was so bad about being with her? What about her was so unattractive? What, in short, was wrong with her? Was it just the chair? Was that all? Was Bach so blind that he couldn't see past that one stupid little fault? It was her worst feature, yes, but hardly a fatal one. She had to believe it wasn't a fatal one. But if not that, then what? It wasn't just Bach, either, though Nessa never doubted that the tall munchkin was the only man for her. She had to admit she was hurt to realize that in all her time at Shiz, no one else had ever looked her way twice. She had several gentlemen acquaintances, even friends, and none of them had ever shown anything but polite friendliness to her. Ever. Why not? Was she too shy, too hesitant, too weak, or pathetic? Did she unknowingly give off all the wrong signs or words or whatever it was that men were looking for? Or was she really not as beautiful as she'd always thought? Twisting in her seat, Nessa found her reflection in one of the mirrors that lined the small foyer of the woman's dormitory. No, she thought, reassured, she was beautiful. Father had always said so, and now, in this new blue dress with her jeweled shoes and braided hair, wasn't she even more beautiful than the day Bach had asked her to the dance? If nothing else, Nessa knew she was prettier than a lot of the other girls around, but somehow they all had dates anyway. So many of them, too. Girls with bad hair or greasy skin, big shoulders or flat chests. There was even one stocky girl who had to weigh twice what Nessa did, and she'd been steadily dating a good-looking boy for months. Months! It didn't make sense. Why was Nessa Rose, the pretty, clever governor's daughter, always being overlooked? Why did she have to miss out on the parties, the dates, the hugs, and the kisses that everyone else her age had experienced? Thudding footsteps echoed on the floor above, interrupting her sulking. Elphaba appeared, rushing down the stairs, two at a time, rather gracefully, Nessa noticed, for she was never able to help but watch people's feet as they moved, breathing hard and looking a mess. Her hair was tangled, one sleeve rolled up, but she was also brighter, somehow, than the girl sitting stiffly in the mirror. You're late, Nessa scowled. If Father's already there, we'll make it, said Elphaba. She took hold of the chair's handles and began pushing them out the door. I'm sorry I lost track of the time. Nessa didn't acknowledge this or even thank her for the customary push. She sat back as they made their way outside, arms folded, her thoughts lost in a harsh tangle of resentment. Even Elphaba had somebody. That might be what stung the most. Elphaba was her sister, the one who was supposed to be her best friend in life. She was the one who'd once said, You'll be like me. You'll make the best of your life alone. But she wasn't alone. She had Fiyero. Oh, she was discreet about it, probably trying to shelter her crippled little sister, but Nessa knew. She might have informed the world at large out of sheer spite, if it weren't for her jealousy and worse, incomprehension. Elphaba was green. Nessa loved her sister, really she did, but it was unfathomable that someone so obviously abnormal could win attention, especially romantic attention, before pale, pretty Nessa did. So she said nothing as Elphaba wheeled her across the university grounds and to the train station, which lay between their campus and the town. It was fairly busy today, but not impossibly so, and Elphaba got them there a good 10 minutes before their father's train was due to arrive. Nessa relaxed, smoothing her skirt, and was almost ready to forgive her sweating, worn-out sister when a voice called, "Elphaba! Elphaba, over here!" Fiyero, of course. Nessa couldn't see him, being well below the head height of the crowd, but she knew his voice, and her sister suddenly began smiling. Without asking where Nessa wanted to go, though she didn't actually care, Elphaba wheeled them down the platform to where Fiyero stood, hands in his pockets, grinning. "Nessa," he said cheerfully, finally spotting her. "Haven't seen you in a while. What are you doing here?" "We're here to meet our father," Nessa replied, as Elphaba sat on the bench and caught her breath. "He was meant to arrive yesterday, but some business came up and delayed him." The merchant strike, I heard," said Fiyero, and it irked Nessa to realize that of course he would know that. It affected the Vinkus, too. "Well, I'm glad you're here," he told them both, leaning against a pillar. "My family's an hour late, and I've no idea how much longer they're going to be." His eyes lingered on Elphaba, taking in her disheveled appearance, and his brow furrowed. "You all right?" "Tired," she said in a heavy breath, stretching her legs and rubbing one calf. "It's hot," she added, as though she couldn't be tired for any less forgivable reason. Nessa felt rather guilty. "Come on, let's get you a drink," said Fiyero, offering his hand. "There's a shop at the end of the platform. We'll be right back, Nessa." So she wasn't invited. What a surprise. With an iced, bright yellow fruit drink in hand, Elphaba walked slowly back towards her sister, idly chatting with Fiyero about just how absurd the stories in gossip magazines actually were. The newsstand had several up on display, including one which steadfastly claimed that he was dating Glinda again, though she wasn't named outright, just referred to as a lovely blonde sorcery student, despite repeated denials on both their parts. "I really wish you'd just let me tell them all that I'm dating you," said Fiyero, who had been annoyed by this for a while. "It'd make life a lot easier." She winced, apologetic, but said, "Please don't. They'll think it's political, and I think that might be worse." Stealing her drink and taking a sip, Fiyero shook his head. "Won't happen. They all think I'm a brainless cad, remember? No one's going to believe I'm dating you just because you're supposedly the wizard's apprentice." Elphaba hesitated, wondering if she'd be able to tell him the whole truth, that she did care enough about what people thought to be humiliated when they assumed she was too repulsive to be wanted for anything other than politics. But then, suddenly, a high, happy little voice cried out, "Yarrow, yarrow, 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 yarrow!" They both turned in surprise, Fiyero with a sudden grin on his face, and Elphaba was just quick enough to see a short blur of long hair and blue sundress run towards them at full belt before it crashed into Fiero's winning arm, squealing, "Yarrow!" Fiyero laughed, lifting the little girl, who had to be his sister Meru, and spinning her in the air. Elphaba stepped back and saw that beyond them, by the road, which ran parallel to the platform, the rest of the Tigulars were just stepping out of the carriages. "How's my favorite sister?" asked Fiyero, slowing their spin and putting her down, kneeling beside her. Meru giggled. "Yarrow, I'm your only sister!" He faked an astonished expression. "You know, I think you might be right." Then he grinned and tickled her, and Meru laughed again. Watching, it was painfully easy to understand why he had turned down a trip to the city just to avoid missing her birthday. Feeling intrusive, Elphaba backed off entirely, walking over to take a seat on the bench beside Nessa and watching quietly as Fiyero greeted his family. He described them all to her at one point, and it was easy to put names to faces. The absurdly thin, gray-eyed man was his father, Lord Harrel, king technically, but the Vinkus never used those titles among themselves. And the tall striding woman was his mother, Lady Amadelle. She was the one Fiyero freely credited with every gentlemanly manner he had. "Don't let her fool you," he'd once said. "Mother's very nice, but if she wants to teach you something, you will learn." As Amadelle stepped back from the greeting hug her son had given, she blinked and said, "You cut your hair? Figaro!" He shied, sheepish. "Sorry, mother." "Promise me you'll grow it," she said, and it couldn't have sounded more like a command if she'd shouted. Her husband juggled, touching her shoulder and saying something quietly in her ear. Amadelle softened and sighed, shaking her head. There was a hint of a smile on her face, which grew warmer as she looked at Harral, and Elphaba was suddenly reminded of something else Fiyero had said. "My parents are embarrassingly in love. I think we're lucky it's just the four of us." Meru was still clinging to Fiyero's hand, and when he crouched down to greet his youngest brother, 4-year-old Dian, she exclaimed, "He doesn't remember you!" and scowled like it was the most horrible thing in the world. Fiyero mussed her pretty hair and said he didn't mind. She remembered, didn't she? That left only the teenage brother, Narjin, who looked somber, sullen almost, as he greeted Fiyero. There was little else to say about him. Apparently he and Fiyero had never been close, being of extremely different character, and from the perfunctory way they shook hands, it was clear that not disliking each other was about as good as things were going to get. Then the unexpected happened. Fiyero turned around and waved for both Throp sisters to come and join him. Nessa, who had been pretending to watch the notice board for updates on the delay of their father's train, jumped and looked at Elphaba, who was suddenly hesitant. After a moment more, she hissed, "Elphaba, they're an important family. Father would be disgraced if his own daughters didn't—" Elphaba quickly grabbed the chair handles, and Nessa fell silent, smiling politely as she was wheeled over. By this time, the other Vinkins had caught sight of them, and, predictably, turned to make their standard greetings. Meru and Narjin were staring at Elphaba's skin, though Narjin was valiantly pretending not to, and little Dian cowered behind his father's leg as Nessa's big scary chair approached them. All in all, not a very auspicious introduction. Everyone was courteous, of course, as Fiyero said, "These are my friends," with only a very, very slight emphasis on the word, accompanied by a glance at his girlfriend, Elphaba and Nessa Rose Throp. "Their father's arriving today, too." "Ah, Governor Throp's daughters," said Lord Harral pleasantly, reaching out with their hands. "Pleasure to meet you." "Thank you," Elphaba said softly, briefly shaking his hand. "And to you," continued Nessa, sounding for a moment like the leader she was soon supposed to become. "It's a shame we've never met before." "It is. I understand you're soon to take your father's office?" asked Harral, glancing between the sisters with faint uncertainty, quite likely recognizing which one of them was actually older. Nessa answered as though she were an only child. "My mother's technically, but not right away. Father and I prefer that I start slowly, working together." This formal, polite conversation went on for a little while, and might have lasted a lot longer if Meru, who was still holding her brother's hand very tightly, had it peeked out from around his elbow to quietly watch Elphaba. The green girl only noticed after several minutes. Curiosity overcoming her, Meru tugged on Fiyero's hand until he crouched down again and let her whisper into his ear. Then he laughed. Meru hit him with her small hand, embarrassed, but softened when Fiyero replied, "Why don't you ask her? She won't mind, I promise. She's very nice." Meru shook her head fiercely, shy and curling up against her brother's shoulder. "Elphaba," he said, then broke off chuckling. "Elphaba, she wants to know if being green hurts." "Meru!" shrieked their mother, but Elphaba was just surprised. That was a new one. After a moment, she shook her head, looking at the girl and trying hard not to be menacing. "No," she said, "it doesn't hurt." Then, because Fiyero was waving her over so obviously that she couldn't politely refuse, Elphaba took a step closer and knelt down at arm's length from Fiero's little sister. After another moment, during which Nessa's frown deepened, Meru whispered something to her brother again, and Fiyero repeated, "She says you have pretty hair." Maybe this wouldn't turn out so bad after all. Elphaba's face broke into a smile, and she said, "Thank you. I like yours too." Meru didn't answer, but she brightened and giggled, biting a lip. The other Tigulars, except for Narjin, smiled, and Elphaba felt the wonderful glow that comes from knowing that finally you've managed to do something right. It was almost another hour before Frex's train finally arrived from Munchkinland. By then the Tigulars had, with Fiero's apologies, left for the university, where they, like Frex, were being housed in vacant staff quarters in deference to their rank. Glinda's parents, like everyone else, were being accommodated in town. As usual, Frexpar was dressed in his maroon robes of office, complete with a fur cap that must have been killing him in the summer heat. His entourage was small, limited to 2 servants and an assistant, all of whom were soon busy trying to extract a large crate from their compartment before the train took off again. "Nessa," he beamed, striding towards them. "My beautiful little girl, look at you, graduating with honors. I'm so proud of you." As always, he knelt beside Nessa's chair, and she was happy again, reaching out as best she could to hug him. "Father," she said with all the warmth that was missing from her last month's worth of conversations, "I was afraid you wouldn't make it." "I would never miss this day, my pretty, never," said Frex, stroking her braided hair and kissing her forehead. "I always knew you could do it." Then, as had happened every time they'd seen him since first coming to Shiz, Frex looked at Elphaba to offer much less enthusiastic greetings. Unlike every other time they'd met, though, she wasn't standing respectfully behind Nessa's chair, but sitting quietly on the bench. She was perfectly polite, though, nodding and saying, "Hello, Father," and one couldn't help but notice that her chosen position put her closer to Frex's eye line than ever before. "Elphaba," he said in return, "congratulations on finishing a double major, wasn't?" "Yes, history and sorcery." He said. Well done." It says a great deal about Elphaba that those gruff, dutiful words sparked such a happy glow in her heart. She smiled widely, honestly, and didn't mind in the least when Frex had the servants open his huge box to reveal a graduation present for Nessa, a new cushioned, stately-looking red chair. "Fit for a Madame Governess," declared Frex proudly, so loud that everyone still at the station could hear. Nessa was delighted, of course, and even allowed her father to lift her up in public, just so she could try out the new chair immediately. It was for indoors only, too fancy to be exposed to the elements, and had to be boxed up again for now, but Frex promised that it would be ready for her to use at the ceremony. Then the Thraps made their way back to campus in as cheerful a fashion as they ever really managed. At Shiz University, graduation ceremonies were always a lavish affair. Being the oldest, largest, and most prestigious university in Oz, it had a tendency to flaunt just a little, particularly when anyone from its only real competitor, Quox College, was there to see. But, to be fair, Shiz was also the best. It was always Shiz alumni who were making breakthroughs in whatever field they had chosen to study, and always Shiz professors whose opinions were sought with regard to sensitive matters by any of the nobility. No other institute could boast a sorcery program either. Therefore, it was no surprise that Shiz was a very rich establishment, nor that its wealth was sometimes put to very flamboyant use. There were things to be said for practicality, though. The morning was bright blue and sunny, and the ceremony was being held out in the picturesque gardens, where row after row of polished wooden chairs were laid out neatly on the grass, all facing an equally polished podium, behind which every single professor sat, dressed in their finest academic apparel, and proudly applauding every student who walked by. Headmaster Aaron, an elderly bear who had once taught chemistry, had begun the day with a fine, somewhat long-winded speech about how wonderful all this was, how proud he was of them all, how thankful, and so on and so forth. Few people were actually listening. Elphaba, Nessa, and Fiero were all sitting patiently beside each other near the back of the student section of the audience. Glinda was a row further back, with the other students surnamed Yu, and all were getting just a little too warm as the sun baked down on their long black robes. The brightly colored sashes that hung down everyone's backs were made of silk or satin, and all were slightly reflective, so that for all that this was their day of glory, every student, save for those in the very front row, spent most of the ceremony squinting. Still, they had a wonderful time. Fiero, in particular, was extremely proud of himself, and Nessa, once she had lost sight of Bock's bright red sash, was glowing from the depths of her new chair. Glinda had changed her mind about her dress several more times before rushing to put on the blue, which made Chistery, who was sitting on the far side with two of his sisters, very happy. What very few people realized, and Elphaba certainly wasn't among them, was that an uninvited guest had appeared on campus at the very last minute, startling the entire faculty, and that he was now sitting very comfortably in the front row of the audience, right in front of the stage, his black stovepipe hat glinting in the sun. King Harald recognized him, of course, and paused to offer surprised greetings as his own family took their seats in the same row. Frex, on the other hand, said very little, for though he was certain that they'd met before, he just couldn't put a name to his face. Oscar Diggs just smiled happily. It was nice to be out again. When at last every student surnamed A through to S had received their diploma, and by now the audience was so tired of clapping that each student received only half-hearted efforts by anyone other than their families, it was finally Elphaba's turn. She and Nessa and Fiero had been quietly led from their seats by a staff member, Glinda waved merrily from behind, and were waiting in line off to one side of the main podium. Then she saw it. The hat. She would know that hat anywhere. "He's here," she whispered harshly. "He didn't tell me he'd be here." Fiero followed her gaze to the little old man who sat quietly in the front row, and for a moment he blinked in surprise. That was the wizard? He was so short. "Maybe he thought you knew?" Nessa offered lightly, surprised by the reaction. "Maybe he wanted to surprise you," added Fiero, touching her shoulder. Elphaba softened. "Maybe. You're probably right," she sighed. She wasn't angry exactly, but she hated being caught off guard. It didn't help that Diggs was sitting right next to her to Frex, and it was possible that he might recognize one of the few physical traits that little old man shared with his biological daughter. But there was nothing she could do, not now, and she refused to let anyone ruin her day of glory. She, the freakish green daughter of Munchkinland, had just earned one of the most difficult qualifications Shiz offered, and in a moment's time, she was going to walk across that stage, head held high, and accept the papers which proved her worth to the world! When that moment came, she was shaking. Whether out of glee or terror, she had no idea. Elphaba walked, feeling the eyes of the crowd on her, hearing the odd noises as they recognized first her name, then her skin, then the rare strip of white fabric in her hood. She felt defiant, as though this were a challenge to stare down, but then Dr. Dilliman broke tradition and stood up from his chair to applaud her specially. She smiled, feeling better, and was just reaching with dignified grace for the diploma Professor Aaron held out to her, when a whooping cheer burst from the front row. Diggs was clapping loudly, shining eyes fixed on her, and his face full of pride. The crowd, roused from lethargy by Dilliman's gesture, mindlessly followed along. The applause grew louder, if not by much, and Elphaba paused, hand extended towards the scroll, feeling something warm well up inside her chest. This was amazing. People were clapping for her. No jeers, no mutterings. Cheers! For a moment she thought she could fly. She never really noticed Frex. His eyes were only for Nessa anyway. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Elphaba waited on the other side of the stage for her sister, then Fiero and Glinda, all of whom were grinning like fools as they clutched their graduation scrolls. Glinda squealed, heedless of the impatient staff member who was trying to herd them away, and launched herself at Elphaba, hugging her and knocking their caps askew. She attacked Fiero next, then Nessa, and then as the staff lady all but shoved them out of the way of the other students, Fiero quickly tugged Elphaba behind one of the hedges and kissed her until they both were dizzy with glee. Things wound down a bit after that. A wine and cheese luncheon was held for all guests, graduates, and faculty members in Shiz's vast dining hall, and with sunlight streaming through the wall-like windows, it felt like they were standing in a massive gazebo. Glinda sipped her wine with pleasure, happily dividing her attention between Fiyero and Elphaba, her parents, their parents, and other friends like Shen Shen and Piani, whose families briefly joined the Thrap Upland Tiggilar circle while the girls became all nostalgic and the others looked on with fond amusement. Frex and Lord Harral, having known each other for quite some time already, quickly found themselves talking about business, a conversation which Nessa tried very hard to be a part of, even though she lacked some relevant knowledge. After a while, the two leaders took pity on poor Mr. Upland, who was standing aimlessly between them and the chattering women, and included him in their discussion. Social climber that he was, Glinda's father, whose name was Alden, was delighted to join in. Kara Upland, meanwhile, was reminiscing over the rim of her wineglass. "I just can't believe it," she sniffled, looking fondly at her pretty daughter. "It seems only yesterday my little Linny was learning to walk, and now, oh, just look at her! A sorceress! Invited to live in the Emerald City!" Lady Amadel was too busy trying to keep her daughter still and her toddler quiet to give a real answer, and after a moment she gave up entirely, summoning one of her servants to take both children to outside. Elphaba, however, snickered. "Linny," she whispered. Glinda's cheeks turned red. "Oh, don't! Elfie, don't! I mean, Elphaba. Elphaba, please don't start using that name. I grew out of it when I was 10. Elphaba's grin just grew wider, in direct proportion to her friend's eyes. "Do you dare?" "What's that, dear?" asked Kara Upland, turning to the girls. Glinda put on a pretty smile. "Nothing, Mumsy," she said charmingly. "Linny was just telling me how much she's missed that nickname," Elphaba replied sweetly. "Really? Oh, that's so sweet," gushed Kara, stroking Glinda's hair. "I was worried she might be embarrassed, but oh, darling, that's so good of you." "I'll get you for this, Elfie," Glinda hissed the moment her mother's back was turned. "I swear I'll get you. I'll make you wear ruffles and ribbons and a little bow, too." Elphaba cackled. Fiyero, meanwhile, had been drifting between the two groups, barely interested in his father's rambling about the merchant strike, but not wanting to join the women's conversation either. He was just about to slip away and fetch another drink when Frex abruptly shifted topic by saying, "She's going to make an excellent governor, isn't she?" The other fathers nodded politely and complimented Nessa, who beamed. "Top scores in political science, you know," Frex continued proudly. Then he asked Lord Harral, mostly out of politeness, "Your son also majored in politics, didn't he?" The Vinkin nodded, and spying Fiyero, waved him over with a big grin. "By necessity, of course. He always hated his lessons as a child," Harral told them cheerfully. "Remember that, son. Never could get you to sit still, and now you're a graduate!" He clapped Fiyero on the shoulder, chuckling. "A graduate from Shiz too! I never thought I'd see the day, my boy. Never!" And still chuckling, he turned to Alden Upland, who was saying something about how all this was making him feel old. Fiyero, far from amused, looked hurt. It only lasted a second, a fleeting moment in which his guard was down, but it was enough for Glinda and Elphaba, who had long since tuned out of motherly ramblings, to notice. They exchanged a worried glance. Fiyero saw it and sharply turned away. "Fiyero," said Elphaba. "Don't!" he replied, and, unnoticed by the parents, strode off towards the refreshment table. The girls followed. "Fiyero, he didn't mean it," said Glinda, touching his arm gently. Fiyero snorted, taking refuge by leaning back on a wall out of sight. "Yes, he did." "He didn't mean it badly," she amended. "He's your father. He loves you." "Sure he does. But he still thinks I'm stupid," said Fiyero, taking a glass of the strongest wine he could find. "They all do. They're stunned that I managed to stay here this long, let alone pass all my classes." "They shouldn't be," said Elphaba quietly. "You're not stupid. You never were." He said nothing, just drained the glass. "You're not stupid!" "Remember what I said about those magazines, Elphaba? It's the same thing. I've made my reputation, and now I'm stuck with it." "That's not true," said Glinda. "It's hard, yes, but we can change it." "Prove them wrong," implored Elphaba. "Look at you. You have your degree. You're the heir to the throne. Prove them wrong." "How?" I have no power in the Vinkus until after my father dies, and it's not like he'll turn any important problems over to me. She floundered, then said, Come with us to the city. Help us do something. Again he said nothing, but this was a softer silence, a thoughtful one. Glinda rubbed his shoulder. I'd feel a lot better if you were there, she said quietly. We haven't learned half of what we need to know, even with all your help. He huffed, but it was half-hearted. Do you know Narjin thinks you've been tutoring me? He asked. Your brother strikes me as a moody little brat, Elphaba said. I don't care what he thinks. We know better. And your family loves you anyway, said Glinda, giving him a little hug. Come on, please. With a small smile, Fiyero looked up, slowly nodding. I love you both. You know that. Glinda hugged him fully, while Elphaba just smiled back. Fiyero lifted her hand and kissed it. I'm sorry. Don't be. I know how you feel. They were halfway back to their parents when Headmaster Erin, puffing, pulled Elphaba aside and said in a hushed, odd voice, The Great Oz has asked to see you. She was expecting that. Where is he? The dining suite, across the hall, said Erin, waving his paw towards one of the plain little doors set in the only real wall. Elphaba thanked him and walked towards it, the others following, but they paused when the bear coughed and said, Miss Throp, I am not sure. Your friends are invited. Of course they are, she said simply, and kept right on going. Glinda hid a smile and filed away that tone for future use. Did Elfie realize how commanding she sounded? How Vizier-like? The dining suite was a modest room full of immodest furniture, designed as a place where important faculty members could entertain any guests they deemed worthy. Oscar was alone inside, but a man with a red beard and casual clothes was standing near the door, and Elphaba was sure other guards were hidden nearby. As soon as he saw her, the Wizard of Oz all but bounced over to the door. Elphaba! Oh, Elphaba, look at you! Congratulations! He exclaimed, hugging her despite all previous evidence that she didn't like to be touched. Elphaba endured it with good grace. Thank you, she said, extracting herself. I didn't realize you were going to be here. Couldn't resist. No one in my family ever got into a university before, much less finished a double major with honors. I'm so proud of you. Here, he said, turning around to pick something up and rising with a huge bouquet of white roses. These are for you. And Glinda, my dear Glinda, good to see you again. These are for you. With a jolly smile, he handed her an equally large bunch of roses, these ones pink. She thanked him brightly before turning and tugging on Fiero's hand, pulling him forward and into their little circle. Mr. Diggs, this is Fiero Tigular. Fiero, this is Mr. Diggs, she said. Oscar, continued the wizard, reaching out to shake hands. Good to meet you. The girls talk about you all the time. Congratulations to you too, son. Fiero grinned and returned the handshake with pleasure, his earlier moping having ebbed a bit. Same here. Glad to meet you. Beaming, Oscar looked over them all. This is wonderful, he declared, hands on their shoulders. Look at you. 3 corners of Oz, all together at shiz. Wonderful. Elphaba's humor cooled. It's a shame you're not a quadling, she said. Oh, didn't I mention? Oscar asked in a tone that made Glinda sure he had forgotten nothing and had set this up as the perfect moment to deliver this news. 2 quadlings have been presented with the Emerald City Scholarship. They're already enrolled for next year. One plans to major in literature, I think, and the other in law. For a moment, Elphaba blinked, speechless. Really? Yes, he grinned. She broke out in a smile and gave a little laugh. That is wonderful, she said. Thank you. Least I could do, Oscar replied with a shrug. Really, it's amazing how many little injustices are hidden away in our great Oz. I'm finding more every day. There's so much to do. It's so good to know I'll soon have your help. And Fiero's, said Glinda politely, but as a statement, not a request for permission. She had learned that tone from Elphaba. Oscar barely noticed. Wonderful! He exclaimed, reaching out to shake Fiero's hand again. 2 heads are better than 1, eh? After a moment, seeing their puzzled expressions, he amended, well, 4 are better than 3, right? It's a saying, he explained. From your world? Asked Glinda, intrigued. He nodded, and at their prompting, began to talk about other similar expressions that he'd never heard again since leaving home. The world beyond the deserts fascinated all three Ozians, and so they chatted a while longer, a comfortable, easy conversation that Fiyero had no trouble becoming part of it. It was like he was always meant to be there. Elphaba, rather uncharacteristically, was quiet, listening more than she spoke. It occurred to her that of all the wonderful scenarios she'd dreamed up from the moment Morrible praised her talent, this had never been one of them. Not even close. What's more, she realized that she was honestly looking forward to all of this. The city, the power, even the title. This was her chance to make good. She was not about to waste it.